That's perfect.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, awesome. You're on.
So I'm Mitchell. I started the Western Australia group. I was actually from New Zealand originally, lived in Hamilton and Auckland, but moved here. I've lived here for now 10 years. So I just wanted to share what we've been doing. So we first went out in January and we actually printed letters, and then we had a space down here where people could sign their address and their name. And then based on their address, we look up their federal politician and we send that letter, we go to the office and deliver the letter. So we did that about 10 times, 3 or 4 hours. We just set up a table, put our letters on the table, pens to sign the letters, and then just those 10 times, about 3 or 4 hours, we had 480 letters signed from people, and we delivered them to basically every federal politician in our state. And also we've had letters to the council. So we successfully got Fremantle Council, which was a city in Perth. It's on the coast, and they've supported Julian Assange. We've also sent 100 letters to the Foreign Minister, Maurice Payne. So I think if you guys think that's a good idea, I'd definitely recommend it.
Totally.
Get heaps of support.
Yes, and we need this skill, like the thinking around these, and I think low tech is an answer. Definitely signing paper ballots as well, but faxes even. So the digital, if we can get the tech people to coordinate the sort of digital market and the scheduling of it, then maybe this low tech approach is fantastic.
Yeah, you get a lot of people come up and they say, I never usually sign a petition like this, or I never usually get involved in stuff like this, but this is just wrong. And then you can also, we also have another piece of paper where people sign a petition, and we ask them to put their email, put their phone number, and then we say, can we contact you? And they tick that box, and if they tick that box, then you can add them to your group or contact them about events, stuff like that. So that was actually a tip that we got from the Amnesty International president of WA, and I've also been talking to them. So
are they supportive? I mean, I know that everyone knows that Amnesty Australia or Amnesty in general put out a petition 3 working days before the extradition trial, which in my book, I should probably not say this live, but in my book, because I've been actively campaigning against them, that was an insult. And if you ask me, that was about getting fundraising. That was about capitalizing on the peak time of anger and its interest and then making money out of it. So I've been at Amnesty for years. So I'd be very interested to hear if you've got a different story to tell about Amnesty. Please.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I think it was late last year, I called the Amnesty president of WA, which is the state where Perth is, and she agreed to have a meeting. And I went with another person that I met on Facebook through my group, and we just talked to her about the whole situation. And she basically understood. She said she was very supportive. She said she'd be willing to come on event with us. I was talking to the union as well, so the union that you probably have an Amnesty group. Just talked to the organisers of that, and they also agreed to have the petition and the letters out at their tables. Actually,
Please support this action. Patrick is saying, please support this action. So that's okay. That's definitely right. Patrick is off mute and off video at the moment. There you are. I lost Perth, and I thought maybe you could come back on for me, Patrick, and talk to us, because you obviously like that idea that you just heard from Perth, and I want to go back to him, because I know people have been saying this before, but the actual idea of physically getting their signature is brilliant, and I don't know why we haven't done that here.
I was not paying attention to Perth. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I just was jumping on because we lost Perth, and Perth were just talking about how they were printing out quality letters basically most people can't disagree with, and getting people to physically sign paper copies and having a whole bunch of them, and they've managed to send off about 400 letters to MPs by physically getting addresses. So hopefully we'll get him back soon. I don't know what happened, but he seemed to cut out. He must have left the meeting accidentally. So I just thought I'd jump to you because you were there.
Yeah, no problem. So we start this campaign here with this pictures with the statement for Mr. Assange behind bars. You have to take part, Alex?
Yeah.
I have a picture for you.
Can you talk more into the microphone, just so that we get as clear as possible?
Okay. Can you hear me good? Is this okay? I can't. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we started this campaign, I think, 2 weeks ago, and now we have 60 people sending us pictures. I think this is a quite good result for starting this for the first 2 weeks. So everybody clicking on this link and looking at this little video. I would appreciate it if you can support this action. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we are definitely going to support that campaign, and I think we should all learn something potentially from Perth there, because it's just so low tech and so simple. It's just the sort of thing we need to get onto. I wanted to ask Perth whether they had been fundraising their own money to print out all this stuff, and whether they found any good ways of dealing with that. But I'm not sure if they're hearing me. Sounds like sound's gone. Yeah?
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Ah, cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, so with the funding, no, I haven't actually got any funding, but a few nice people if I just mention that it costs money to print and send the letters sometimes. If the parliamentarians are far away, I have to send a letter. It costs $1 for the stamp, but they just give me like a $5 note or a $10 note. And yeah, I've had another guy on Facebook even send me $50. I've just kind of mentioned it to people, but haven't really started my own fundraising because I don't want to kind of take away from the main donations to Wikileaks and stuff like that. And it's actually very cheap. So if you go to Officeworks, a black and white page is 8 cents. So print 100 for $8. 1,000 envelopes I bought for $13, and I wrap them all individually in the envelope so that whoever's opening them has to open them all. They don't just get a pile of the same pieces of paper and then can kind of like
count them as one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So they have to open each letter, and they have replied, but usually the replies are just the Australian government is saying we cannot intervene, which is obviously not true because they have in the past for other journalists. There's a case of Peter Greste.
Yep.
And also James Ricketson was a filmmaker, and there's clear evidence that our government did interfere. Even the Foreign Minister used the word intervention for one of those journalists previously, and now they're saying they're Julian Assange. So I don't know. It's just.
Well, I think that's an amazing endeavour that you've organised there, and I don't even know why that sort of thing. I mean, I think MEB told me first about getting clipboards. I don't know if you can see this, but we've got where is it there? Whoops.
Yeah.
I keep on going the wrong place. We've got this candles sign-up sheet now, and we only just started doing that recently. I think Patrick, one of the reasons Patrick's done so well is because he was just going out there every week at the same time, the same place, just made it a weekly date, and that just brought a whole lot of people on. That consistency really worked there. So these kind of ideas, they're so low-tech and simple, and I think we need to activate them in a really professional way way. And I think we have the skills. We've got the Joe, we've got the Joe Booths who are technical, and, we've got people that are a bit of jack of all trades. I'm a bit like that. There's so many people that we can get on board. The problem is that whenever you try to do anything like Unity4J does, or I don't know about the Action for Assange people, how they've found it, and they've certainly had a lot of trolls and agents on their streams and problems with their streams, but I wonder how other people are coping with it and whether it's going the same way for them.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say about maybe you feel like a bit hesitant to go out onto the streets. I definitely was. I just started it by making a Facebook event, and only 3 people came, and that was in November. And after that, I was pretty disheartened, didn't do things for another probably 2 months. But when I did, more people came, and it was about 6 people the second time, just through Facebook and Twitter. And eventually it just built up just pretty quickly, and we had a rally and 40 people came. And that was just from Facebook and Twitter. And
was that Candles in July? Because I saw a massive group of people in Perth, and I put you guys in my video because it was such beautiful footage with the policemen coming down the mall.
Yeah.
I had to have that in there. That was great.
And also just we're taking a table out and getting people to sign letters. And so at first we had 1 table, and now we've got 3 tables. So we can actually do, and we've got probably 12 people that have been involved with that. So you just need 2 people to stand behind a table, just someone there to talk to, and people just will come up to your table if you have a banner, and they'll just sign the letters. And it's just kept growing and growing. And I've just met all these people, and you just talk to people, and then they say they might come next week, and they might have a table or a banner that they bring. A lady called Nick just donated her banner to me. I'd never met her. She just came up to me and said, "You're the guy for Facebook. Here, have this banner." And so, yeah, I'm
have you been able to convert that effort and energy and those people that are available? Have you managed to find any way of kind of activating it in the last couple of weeks to do anything, get some online stuff happening, or just planning for the future?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about the online stuff. I'm really hoping that this lockdown will be over, especially in WA, because it's isolated from the rest of Australia and New Zealand as well. I think you guys pretty much got it under control for now. So I'm hoping that soon, you'll be open up. And I think we should just plan for a big event as soon as this is opened up, because this trial is still going ahead. So just plan the event now. Contact everyone online. I mean, everyone's at home, so they're available to talk to, which is good.
Yeah,
you can ring all the musicians that you might want to play at your events and stuff. They're all looking for stuff to do.
Right.
So as soon as this is over, we need to get out there, and I'm going to talk to Amnesty and ask them to actually hold a rally, because I think they are in support of us here in WA.
Well, is this a local chapter of the Amnesty, did you say?
Yeah, Amnesty West Australia.
Right. Yeah, because I think the ones that I focused on were probably the international ones. And what happened when I focused on Amnesty, 2 things happened. Once was when I was outreach. Susie asked me to do some outreach, and I wasn't really sure about what I was doing, and I was a bit like a bull in a china shop. But one of the first things that other supporters were trying to encourage me to do was contact Amnesty. And that's why I kind of got so involved, actually, in pissing them off. But what happened was that I wrote an email to Amnesty Australia, and their media person called back and emailed straight back with this amazing bullet point list of their support for Julian. And there were a few disclaimers in there, but it was essentially a supportive statement, which, considering that their website was showing a smear about Sweden from 2012 up until 3 days before our trial in February, it was just amazing. And so we got this response from this media person. It turned out to be a single person and their feelings on it, and they were knowledgeable, and so they instantly gave their feeling back, or some kind of unofficial message came out of Amnesty, and luckily we got it published really quickly, and Wikileaks posted it to their timeline just before they managed to retract it and say, oh, this was just one person acting in an office giving her opinion and it's not what Amnesty think. And so that was an interesting thing, but it certainly ruffled their feathers, and they didn't act then. And the reason we were on to them then was because Chelsea Manning was being banned, and Amnesty Australia was doing quite a lot for Chelsea. And so from New Zealand, that was hosting her live streams because she couldn't go to Australia, we started putting on the attack on Amnesty. And so that was an interesting response. And the other one was Emmy B and I were discussing a shamnesty protest around about, December, I think it was. And so we had literally just sorted out a logo that said Shamnesty, and she was going to do London, and I was going to try and get people to do offices, or at least ring them everywhere. And before that protest even came about, they put out their positive statement, and everyone was asked to shut up and put those memes away.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm actually muting through my desk, so I'll just change my...
I couldn't resist the picture-in-picture opportunity there, sorry.
It's an infinite fractal of supporters. See, there's so many of us. Okay, sorry, where was I? I'm back here.
Sorry, I distracted
to you, Mitchell. There you go. Sorry about that. It's a bit choppy.
Yeah, we were, I guess, pretty annoyed at Amnesty as well, just the lack of kind of action. But I think you've just got to put that behind you. Like, now that they're on board, he's on the website. He was on the front page of the Australian website for a few weeks. I think you can really go to they have these groups called local action groups, who are basically groups of activists, I guess. And if you look up your local action group, you can go to those meetings and actually just ask them to act on this. Just make it about human rights, make it about health, freedom of speech. Don't need to go into other stuff that they might not be interested in, but they will support you, I think.
Okay. Well, I would like to think that's true, and it's not just about money and how many people they could get 3 days before the extradition trial with the minimum amount of actual effect. That's what it certainly seemed like to me. But I will give them maybe the international secretariat who is the person that makes the decision. So effectively, that's the CEO, whoever's the top of Amnesty, decides what their campaigns are, and that was their complaint, that they would like to act, but they can't because the international secretariat effectively is telling them what they can and cannot. And for whatever reason, 3 days before the trial, that was lifted, and I'd be very curious as to why that was lifted and when and then.
They probably had a heads up on your action impending on Shamnesty.
I'd love to think that.
Was the best route.
Yeah. I don't think we were going to be a huge protest, but I think we were having quite a draw online because it was going out with the candles and Emmy stuff and Julian Assange Defence Committee in London, so a lot of people were seeing it potentially.
They told me that they looked at my previous Facebook and Twitter posts before they wanted to talk and meet with me. So if you posted anything bad about them, they might not want to talk to you. I
think that I'd be already banned. I have a feeling I actually don't think they like me very much, personally. I have the board member of Amnesty in New Zealand's number, and I was ringing her up in Myanmar and stuff, and I think she's had enough. And I was polite, but I can be a bit bull in a china shop. I'm not the politest person because it just, you do feel like you're smacking your head against the wall sometimes, and you can't help but lash out. And I wish I could be Tulsi Gabbard and just, even though the topic that you're talking about is atrocious and disgusting, and not that I'm approving of what she's done now, but actually, the way that she is able to calmly
statesman-like quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I wish I could channel that, but I am not that person. So I am better used in the sarcastic bitch slap full in a china shop option. Not so good for being diplomatic, possibly.
Have you seen the video where Donald Trump says about WikiLeaks that he thinks there should be the death penalty?
Yeah, I have seen that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and also I've seen the video where he said, "We love WikiLeaks," and I've seen Cassandra Rule's video, which is actually the most telling, and I would 100% recommend people. I actually made my first documentary video on my Alex Hill's channel, and if you go down about 5 or so videos, Cassandra Fairbanks is probably the biggest video that I've managed to do yet, and just listen to that call if you want a little glimpse of what's going on in the Trump administration, because I think Trump supporters do support Julian, and they're in cognitive dissonance mode at the moment. They're going, oh, yes, Q, trust the plan. He's going to be pardoned. Oh, we just need to get him out of the evil British justice system. And once he's extradited, he'll be fine. But do you get the feeling he's going to be fine in America? Because from that call, Cassandra Fairbanks, it just totally blows it out of the water. And I don't even understand how Q can carry on with their bullshit at this point, really, actually. And I mean, this is speaking from someone for the first week of Q, and I was onto it in October of, what was it, 2018 even? I was onto it then, and I was sucked in. I thought, God, if this is real, this is fantastic. Wouldn't it be great if Trump really was cleaning up the deep state? Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it? But it was quite clear very, very quickly that was not the case. And I immediately just went, no. And obviously, you start to see other journalists calling it out. I sort of thought, yeah, no, this is stupid. This is obviously not real. And now I've come to the conclusion that it is just the antidote to the complete bias in the MSM against Trump. This is what you get when you do what you did in the MSM media. Because to be fair, and I don't like Trump, but he was actually spied upon. He was wiretapped. The Russiagate thing was a complete farce. We all know that. Everyone with the brain actually should know that. I think probably. Maybe I'm being, assuming again.
Well, the reason I brought up the death penalty thing is because the Australian government and the New Zealand government as well are both wholly against the death penalty. And they actually said that in Parliament because they were asked, what are you doing? Like, Julian says he's afraid to go to America because he'll get the death penalty. So what are you doing to oppose that? And she said, our foreign minister said, we've had assurances that he won't get the death penalty. But then there's this video on YouTube. I can post the link in the chat, and it's Trump saying, I think he should get the death penalty. So what I've done now in my newest letters, I've screenshotted the video, I've posted the link to the video, and I've quoted him saying that he should get the death penalty. And that's what I think we really need to ask the politicians. If you call them or speak to them in person or in your letters, you've got to ask them, the President of the United States said he should get the death penalty, and our government's opposed, so how can you not oppose this extradition?
I think part of the Cassandra Rules thing was that a deal was made with Ecuador that the death penalty wouldn't apply, and I completely agree with you. It's quite clear. But, I mean, it's also quite clear that Trump will say anything to appease anyone at any time, and it can be different within 1 second to the next, so it's difficult to know how you can do, but your idea there of like combining maybe a snippet of that and then combine it with a video of the UK going, oh, yes, we've totally ruled that we don't believe in the death penalty. And then, combine it with a snippet of someone reading out factual details about the court case and what the judges said. Maybe that kind of tying together a few really key clips in a 2-minute Twitter-sized video that really put the cognitive dissonance to rest, by things like you're suggesting.
Cool. Okay, I've got to go now. But
okay, Mitch. Well, we would love to hear more from you because every idea you've come up with so far has been totally gold, and sort of making us think in a much more low-tech way. And I do love that you think that the protests are going to come back on, but I am actually very skeptical on how much our powers will come back, and I don't think the group meetings are it. I don't think. We've even had discussion in New Zealand, and we've done very well here with the COVID, but we've had discussion about moving back to level 3, whatever that means, which is one stage less than that. I think you can go and have a work meeting, but I don't think the protests will be allowed at that stage.
I think.
That was really great. Doesn't that make you feel good?
Hello there. Right. Hopefully this is all live streaming okay and everyone can hear everyone all right. We've just been playing a little bit from our virtual march that went on 11th of April. And 11th of April marked exactly 1 year since Julian Assange was unlawfully arrested. So we held a massive global protest and New Zealand took part and we had some wonderful guests, and I wanted to just replay that piece from Perth because I thought it was really important to support Australia. So, just hang on, hoping that I'm talking in the right place. Can people hear me okay now? Can people hear me? Kathy, can I unmute you?
I can hear you.
Yes,
I can
okay.
unmute myself.
Great. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So I have got some stuff that I can read out from some New Zealand journalists whenever that suits. And at the moment, I understand that Kathy Vaughan has got Joe Lauria. Is that right? Have you got
Correct.
Joe Lauria to talk to?
Joe will be coming in very soon, and
awesome.
I will interview. Exceptionally, we're going to change roles, and I'm going to interview Joe.
That's wonderful. Yeah, fantastic.
So yeah, we've had a few little glitches to sort out on the stream, but hopefully we've managed to keep a live stream going so far fairly well after Sydney.
Raise my hand. Am I
Hi.
even supposed to be here?
Oh.
I thought I was on at 1 p.m. and then I just got a link to come here.
That's right. No, I just sent a new link to you because the old link got ruined, so I had
Oh,
to
is
also.
it? But I'm supposed to come on later, aren't I?
Yeah, it was
I'm
meant
supposed
to
to be on
be
with Nat.
1
All
o'clock
right,
New
well,
York
okay.
time. That's
I've
wonderful.
been streaming.
Hi.
Hi, Kathy. It's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in forever. I've been live streaming for 8 hours straight, and then I got the link just now, and I'm like, okay, well, I thought it was 1 p.m. That kind of sucks. Let me eat first, But I'm here now, so I'll just stay, I guess,
Wonderful.
unless you don't want me here.
Oh no,
But,
always.
and then I
Thank
guess
you.
I'll be back on again if anybody's interested. I'll be back on again.
Yeah. Great. Well, I've just heard from Randy Critico, and he is wanting to do something as well. And he was planning at 3 o'clock New York time, which is exactly when Mexico's on. So I was just trying to figure out whether he could do it a little bit later,
Well, we
so
did
you're not
something
clashing.
very cool tonight. I want you guys to know in our stream, Nat, who people are getting to know now from Mexico City, wanted me to do a thing where I hold up a picture like y'all doing with the hands off Julian thing.
Yeah.
And because of the situation where I'm at right now and everything, it just was not possible. I wasn't able to get my printer running, and I couldn't get to a print shop to print out a sign or anything. So tonight in our stream, which was broadcast not from reality, but from virtual reality in full avatar. And so we constructed, as a way of teaching people how to build things, we constructed a giant billboard size hands off Julian sign. And then we all gathered around it and took a picture of ourselves in virtual reality, and we tweeted it out. So if anybody wants to see it, it's on my Twitter. It should be very near the top. It was just tweeted out. And it shows a picture of me and my guys, my crew in virtual reality, proudly gathered around a hands off Julian. And I'm actually sending that to Nat tomorrow because that's all she's getting. That's all I got, and that's all I can manage. But it's a really gorgeous picture. It was sunrise, and it was on my home estate, if you will, in virtual reality. So I just wanted everybody to know that I'm doing my part the best I can.
Wonderful. Was that part of the solo vigils, the idea that came from Candles for Assange originally, or is it Nat's idea there? Because Nat's got her own thing going on in Mexico as well.
Oh yeah, they're very active down here, and they have to kind of do their own thing. It's such a language barrier. People do not understand. But as somebody who sits at the top of the mountain called Anonymous, I look down on a world very, very different than most people see it. And down here in Latin America, Anonymous is very strong, very, very powerful. And it's so funny to sit down here and read articles about Anonymous is dead, Anonymous is dying out, they're not powerful anymore. And down here, they're overthrowing governments, literally still to this day. And there are literally millions of them, millions of Anons down here in Latin America. But because of the language barrier and because Western people are so parochial, they've got blinders on. They can't see beyond anything that's the English-speaking Five Eyes nations world. That's the end of their world. So Latin America just literally doesn't fucking exist to them. But down here, it's very, very, very different, and it's very powerful. And one of the first things I discovered when I got to Mexico City was there was I think for considering, I didn't expect anybody there in Mexico City to have heard of Julian. Come on, man. I'd be satisfied if nobody there had heard of him, because what the fuck? It's Mexico City. It's an alien world to me. And when I got down there, they were already marching in the streets. They were already gathering, maybe only a dozen or two people, but they had an organization. They had several, actually, organizations.
Yeah, more than one, definitely.
Yeah.
And I actually have to say, Commander X, I don't know, do you know who Nikki Hager is?
I don't. The name rings a bell, but I don't.
Okay,
I can't grasp
he is New Zealand's, I guess, most favourite investigative journalist. He exposed John Key, our national president, our sort of more right of centre party. And he actually got quite badly harassed. The police had to pay out an undisclosed amount because of them coming and confiscating his computers, and unlawfully, obviously, because he's a journalist. And I told him all about you, and I said that you might have been the reason we did very well on our New Zealand live stream. We had quite a lot of
Well,
people
I'd like
watching.
to think so. The thing is about the whole fame thing, there's so much criticism and everything. Until you've walked a mile in my shoes, you don't know why I've done the things I've done anyway. So I really don't give a fuck. But what I care about is that I got this tool that landed in my lap because of fate or whatever, my own choices. And so if I can use that like a mirror to shine light on other stuff, because I'm safe now, especially since I got asylum. Once I got political asylum in Mexico and knew that I, as an information activist, was safe. I was in a country where I had a government that gave me a piece of paper that said they promised they would keep me safe politically forever. And once I had that, I began to want to start paying it forward and giving back. And so I stopped taking public donations, for instance, and been working very hard to build an actual real domestic life, because there's no more free activist housing for me. I lived in safe houses for 10 years. I literally went from safe house to safe house for 10 years. And I like to joke, but that, that's free activist housing, right? And now I don't get that anymore. So,
well, I think Nikki
I have
Hager
to
was
actually,
intrigued by the fact that Mexico had given an anon asylum. Obviously, I knew that.
and I would like to point out that I'm the first U.S. citizen ever in history, for any reason, to receive political asylum in the nation of Mexico.
Wow.
And I think that is being picked up in the Mexican media. I've been giving some interviews lately, because I know it's kind of off topic, but we have the whole thing going on where we got thousands of people that are trying to get political asylum in America, all camped out along the border, trying to get in, and they wait for years. They wait for years and years, and they're treated like shit. I was treated as an American coming to get the same exact refugee process, the same process, refugee status, and for humanitarian purposes due to political persecution. And they treated me like amazing. I mean, amazing. I went to a ceremony the other day where they did my final interview, and they did sort of I had to bring witnesses. It was really cool. I brought my two best friends here in Guanajuato, Mexico. I had to bring Mexican citizens to witness for me. And it was a little ceremony where I took a sort of another step up in my my regularization status. So I'm more of a citizen of Mexico now, closer to being, an actual functioning member of society. And it was a big step, actually. It might not sound like much, but we went there, all three of us on the bus. It was quite exciting. And they literally opened the office for me on a Corona shutdown.
Yeah, couldn't be more of a contrast to the way that Susie has been treated in New Zealand. Susie Dawson.
Exactly. And, and I really, I don't want to bring up off base and personal stuff. I miss Susie a lot. I noticed that she's been laying low, and
I just did an interview for her. Actually, I just did an interview with Taylor Hiddock.
Great.
And
one of the best interviews. I did a show for years, and one of the best interviews I ever did, and Susie herself said it was one of the best interviews where she has ever been interviewed. But if you want to go to my website, you can find it. But I interviewed Susie on one of my shows, and it was heart-wrenching. It was really, truly, it was heart-wrenching. And what I did was I really went all out. I put together a really special show with some good music that I felt was, touched on her plight. And I really encourage people who have any heart at all, any kind of open-mindedness at all, to take a real long, hard look at Susie Dawson's case and see if you can't find it in yourself to support her as well. I'm big on the fact that, we need to save all of us. I needed political asylum just as bad. I used to take criticism in the months running up to my asylum in December. I used to take criticism. Why are you out there campaigning for your political asylum when Julian's in trouble? Well, you know what? We're all in fucking trouble, man. We all got to do what we got to do. Susie needs the help too, and she needs it right now. I happen to know for a fact from behind the scenes talking to her that there's some very pressing time limits on her.
Yeah,
And
I
so we
mean,
need to keep
Russia has been treating the whole asylum of, she really can't even use a swimming pool. She can't use the bus. She can't go use a bank. It
the
really,
bank
I
is
mean,
the
it's
big
not,
thing
it's a
with me.
very contrasty experience to Mexico. But
The
on the
bank
other
is the big
hand,
thing with me.
New Zealand has an incredibly bad record of harassing activists, Greenpeace, Mana,
Oh,
and New Zealand
I have no
Extend.
doubt that she cannot
Mm.
return home safely. There's no doubt in my mind that Susie Dawson cannot return safely to New Zealand. And because she has children, she's particularly vulnerable, because what they'll do is, if they can't hook her up on something, they'll take her kids. They'll find an excuse to take her kids. And that's a whole other, ball of wax that people fight against. There's activists and whole movements against that sort of abuse of the child protective services. But so Susie faces a lot of challenges that I don't think people can really wrap their mind around or understand. And she faces a lot of criticism because anybody like myself or her who is has a very dynamic personality, a very what people would term extreme viewpoints of ideas of freedom and liberty and stuff like that. Anybody who has that and also has a little bit of fame on them at the same time, they're gonna get the haters. And Susie in particular, because she's a woman and in a vulnerable place about that, they've really piled on her pretty hard. And
Yeah, I mean,
I
in
think
contrast, Nikki Hager has been able to get an amazing payout. I mean, and he's very highly respected and published overseas, and he's had a platform, and so he did have that ability to fight. I will definitely give you that. I would like to
I should go and let you do
no,
your
no.
interviews.
So we're going to see you again.
You can come back to me. I'll stay all
yeah.
night with you. I got electricity
Okay.
now. Do you see the light?
Nice.
Look, no candles, guys.
No,
No
well, it was
candles
nice
for
having you in the
Assange
dark
here.
last
There's
time.
no candles for Assange here at Commander X's house. It's fucking electric lights here, baby.
Great.
All right, I'll stay all
thank
night.
you so
I don't
much
care.
for coming here, and we'll come and talk to you again.
I'll be right here. Just whenever you think of something or you want to bring me in, just let me know.
Thank you so much. All right. So right now, I think we've got Kathy Vogan waiting to come on board and talk and interview her own boss, which is the other way around from normal. Isn't that what you were just telling us?
Kind of, yeah. Am I appearing on Zoom? I can't see myself, but never mind. Can you see me okay?
Yes, I can see you. I can hear you.
All right. Okay, so yes, I'm Kathy Vogan, the executive producer of CN Live with Consortium News. And usually I'm sitting, on the other side of operations, and Joe and Elizabeth are on screen doing the interviews. But today, I think that our editor-in-chief has some very important things to say. So I'm going to kind of interview him. But I imagine that Joe will be doing most of the speaking until he's going to talk, I think, about the history of the extradition and sedition acts. So, Joe, are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy, very much. Just wanted to say, first of all, what a terrific job you do on CN Live as our executive producer. We have our last video was an interview with Jill Stein and Richard Wolff. I recommend people to go and see it. I also want to thank Alex Hill and Joe Booth and everybody else who's working behind the scenes to make this World Press Freedom Day broadcast possible. Yeah, it was the Espionage Act and the Sedition Acts that I've written a piece in Consortium News last week, the first part of a two-part series on the Sedition Act. Coming up this week will be a history of the Espionage Act and how it has ensnared Julian Assange. When you look carefully at the indictment of Assange, the 17 charges under the Espionage Act, which I reread once more, you see what a weak case the government has against him. Basically, they have him on one technical charge that's in the Espionage Act, and that is simply possession and dissemination of classified material. And nobody is arguing that he didn't possess and disseminate classified material given to him by Chelsea Manning. But every time one of us retweets or posts on anywhere on social media or quotes in an article any WikiLeaks document that was classified and that the US government still considers classified. Therefore, we've also violated the Espionage Act because we're possessing it by downloading it, and we've disseminated it by putting it on social media. That's how absurd this charge is, and this Section E of the US Espionage Act. That's all they have Assange on. Everything else in that indictment is what John Kiriakou called window dressing. For example, they go on at length about him supposedly endangering informants. Now, beside the fact that we know from Mark Davis and from Assange's own lawyers in the first 4 days of his extradition hearing in February, that Assange indeed was working overnight that Friday night. He did an all-nighter to redact the names of informants from the publication that was coming out on Sunday in The Guardian, in Der Spiegel, and in the New York Times, and that it was the editors, particularly of the Times and The Guardian, who didn't give a damn about whether those names were in there. There is no law against revealing the names of informants. It's not listed at the top of the indictment, are listed all the statutes that Assange allegedly has violated. All of them are from the Espionage Act, and there's nothing in the Espionage Act about an informant. It's against the law to reveal the name of a covert agent. That's a different law, not in the Espionage Act. Many people might remember the Valerie Plame case of several years ago, where somebody outed her from inside the White House because her husband had written an op-ed in the New York Times saying that one of the key points of the Bush administration's argument for their invasion of Iraq was that some yellow cake had been bought by Iraq from Niger. And Joe Wilson, her husband, debunked that in the Times. And in retaliation, they outed Valerie Plame, who was a covert CIA agent. That's a crime. Assange redacted as many as he could, and that wasn't a crime, even if some slipped through, some names. Plus, the US government has said on the record that they have no knowledge of anyone having been harmed, any informant, by a WikiLeaks publication. So we could just dismiss all that stuff, paragraphs and paragraphs in the indictment about him revealing names of informants. It's not a crime. And he did what he could to redact them, unlike the editors of the Times and the Guardian. So what are we left in the indictment? We're left with him possessing and disseminating classified information. Journalists have for decades, countless journalists in mainstream media have possessed and disseminated classified information. There is this, that's the way you do national security reporting. It's done today still in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, CNN. They're doing what they're accusing Assange of doing. And that's why on World Press Freedom Day, it's so important to focus in on this indictment of Julian Assange and what it means for press freedom, not just for Julian Assange and his fate, but for the press, for the media. If the Trump administration gets away with this indictment, if they get away with this extradition request, they get away with convicting him and putting him away for the rest of his life, 175 years, they have struck a mortal blow to press freedom. This section of the Espionage Act against possession and dissemination clearly runs up headlong into the US First Amendment. There is definitely a conflict there. On its face, it appears unconstitutional. You can't really have a freedom of the press bill in the Bill of Rights. You cannot say in the First Amendment that the press has freedom and we all have freedom of speech, and then arrest and prosecute a journalist for practicing journalism, whether he's considered a journalist or not. Ben Weisner, the other day, in one of these wonderful video webcasts that are being done around World Press Freedom Day, said that whether he's a journalist or not is immaterial because he did conduct as a journalist, what a journalist does. So it doesn't matter whether you think he's a journalist or whatever. And what Julian did was receive classified material from a source, and he published it. That's what journalists do. So to go after him, and we've seen a history since the Espionage Act of 1917, there were moments when governments ran up to the line and then pulled back. FDR did this during the war, but never prosecuted a journalist. In the Pentagon Papers case, when Daniel Ellsberg gave the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, the the Times, the Attorney General of the Nixon administration issued an injunction against the New York Times to have them stop publishing. That went to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled in favor of the New York Times simply because it was considered by the court to be prior restraint. This is completely against the Constitution. A government cannot tell a publication beforehand, you cannot publish this. You must stop publishing. This is clearly a violation of the First Amendment. However, the ruling in that Pentagon Papers case, a lot of people don't know, is that after publication, the government can prosecute. For what? For possessing and disseminating classified information, what they're going after Julian for. That can be done. In fact, Nixon Justice Department impaneled a grand jury in Boston, Massachusetts, to possibly indict 2 New York Times reporters who worked on the Pentagon Papers case. It was only when it was discovered that Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office had been broken into by Nixon's plumbers to dig up dirt on him, and also that his phone was tapped, that these 2 New York Times reporters asked the prosecutors whether they had been tapped as well. Since they'd been speaking on the phone with Ellsberg, clearly their conversations have been listened into. And it was at that point that the Justice Department of Nixon withdrew this grand jury, and it collapsed. So in that case, they did not prosecute a journalist for possession and dissemination, although Nixon came very close to doing it. And then, of course, we know even in Julian Assange's case that the Obama administration was hell-bent on getting him. They had a grand jury impaneled in 2010, and it looked at prosecuting Assange for possession and dissemination of classified information. At the end, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of Obama, and Obama decided they wouldn't do it simply because of what they call the New York Times problem, which is what I described here at the beginning, which is that the New York Times does that all the time as well. So if they prosecuted Wikileaks and Julian Assange, what's to prevent them from prosecuting the New York Times or a subsequent administration? So they could not prosecute Assange because of the principle of the First Amendment, even though it's still on the books in the Espionage Act. It's not been successfully challenged in the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. It's there, but the Obama administration had the good sense to not go forward. But let's fast forward to the Trump administration. Of course, they have done that. I believe one of the driving forces was Mike Pompeo, who was CIA director when the Vault 7 releases came out, and that infuriated him. That was his infamous quote now about Assange and WikiLeaks being a non-state hostile intelligence service. They went ahead and actually indicted him on this. And this is why we have him now on remand in COVID-19 infested Belmarsh prison, awaiting his extradition hearing, which will resume either in July or November. This is a very, very serious matter. It goes right to the heart of freedom of the press. It's exactly the thing to be talking about on this day. I think the indictment is a weak case because that's all they have on him. As I said, the stuff about informants and anything else is just not viable because there's no law that he broke there. What they're really doing, and this is what I said in the piece I published last week, is they are actually, in essence, trying to prosecute him on a law that doesn't exist anymore. The US had 2 sedition acts in its history. In 1798, and in John Adams president, and in 1917 or 18, Woodrow Wilson, when he pushed through the Espionage Act that Assange has been indicted under, he tried to get censorship, legal censorship, put into the Espionage Act, and he lost by a single vote in the Senate. So that was removed from the draft Espionage Act. So censorship was not legalized, even though possession and dissemination was in there and could be applied to journalists. Censorship was rejected by the Senate and by the press and a large part of the public that was aware of this. So what did Wilson do? A year later, he just put together a new act, which he made as an amendment to the Espionage Act, and that was the Sedition Act of 1918, and thousands of people were thrown into jail. Journalists were prosecuted under that, mostly for opposing the war, the First World War. This was a First World War law, of course. And amongst them was Eugene Debs, who was the leader of the Socialist Party in the US, and he was imprisoned, and he actually got almost 1 million votes in 1920 presidential election from inside prison. But that law, when Wilson left, was then repealed, just as the 1798 one was repealed by Thomas Jefferson, the new president. He actually refunded the fines that people had paid under that 1798 Sedition Act. And the 1921, the Sedition Act was removed. The UK latest Sedition Act was from the 17th century. That was repealed only in 2009, unbelievably. I found out when I researched this piece. So Britain and the US do not have sedition acts. But why do I say Assange is being charged, in essence, under an act that doesn't exist anymore? Because they're angry at him for disrespecting government, for embarrassing them, for revealing their crimes. These are the kind of things that you could not say against a monarch, even if it's true. Under that 17th century British Act, even if it was true, you could be prosecuted. And in fact, it was worse. If it was true, they were more angry about that. And this brings us to the John Peter Zenger case in colonial America, colonial New York, province of New York. The governor of New York at that time, William Cosby, was angry at this printer, Zenger, who published some true information against his corruption. The jury that was put in there acquitted Zenger, even though he had broken the law. That's called jury nullification. So even though he did break the law, the jury said, we can't stand for this. And that was really the genesis of this First Amendment that is conflicting now with this part of the Espionage Act. So I'd say Assange is being charged on a very, very technical part of the Espionage Act that is unconstitutional in my view. I hope that his lawyers, if he gets to the US, we hope he doesn't, obviously, but if he does, that's challenged there, and that, in fact, there are two congressmen in the U.S., a senator and a representative, who have put forward a bill that would amend the Espionage Act to exempt journalists, publishers from that section. So it would apply to someone who's not a journalist, but would not apply to journalists. So that probably won't get anywhere in Congress, but it's good to see that two members of Congress have understood how unfair and unconstitutional this part of the Espionage Act is.
Excellent, Joe. Thanks for that history. I'd just like to talk about two things that were discussed in court in the first week of Julian's extradition hearings. Now, the first one was Mr. Lewis's address not to the court, but to the press, when he seemed to be saying to the press, don't worry, you're not going to be charged. That seemed to be the underlying message that they were supposed to receive. And unfortunately, they all up and left after that. But why? As Mark Davis said in his talk at Politics in the Pub, if Julian is in jail, the Guardian journalists should be in jail. All those ones in the bunker. The Guardian built the whole interface for the leaks, the searchable database. He said it was all the Guardian's making, and Julian was just supposed to be the front man. But in fact, he does relate, having been there, Mark Davis, in the bunker. During all of that preparation, that WikiLeaks had a technical problem, and in fact it was the New York Times that ended up publishing first. So in fact, in view of the fact that the Guardian, El País, New York Times, Der Spiegel, they all handled and published the same material, why are they not being prosecuted as well if the Trump administration is so gung-ho against journalists? Or is it just journalists that are called Julian Assange?
Well, they shouldn't be prosecuted because, as I said, this should not apply to journalists. So the New York Times, the Guardian, the Spiegel, whatever, should not be prosecuted. One might say, well, they're foreign publications to the U.S. They are in Britain and in Germany. Why? How could you possibly prosecute Guardian journalists under U.S. law? I want to point out that there was an amendment to the Espionage Act of 1961 that universalized the law. Previous to 61, the way it was written in 1917, the Espionage Act, This crime of espionage of possessing and disseminating classified information, along with other parts of the statute, had to be performed on U.S. territory. But an event happened in Poland in 1960, I believe, in which an American diplomat was found by Polish security services. They burst into a bedroom and they found him in bed with another woman who wasn't his wife. And they took photographs and they blackmailed him. They showed him the pictures and said, if you don't give us these classified documents from the embassy in Warsaw, the US embassy, then we're going to, your life will be ruined. This will be in the newspapers tomorrow. So the guy got the documents. That is US territory in the embassy, but he had to bring them out of the embassy to give them to these agents. And he got caught and the US found out who he was. But he couldn't be charged under the Espionage Act because it took place in Polish territory, not in US territory. So that incensed this congressman, whose name I'm forgetting right now, to push hard, and he took 4 votes, I think, to finally amend the Espionage Act to say that anywhere in the world, anyone who possesses and disseminates classified information or violates other parts of the Espionage Act can be prosecuted. That's how Julian Assange is in Belmarsh right now, because the law says that it doesn't matter if you're Australian, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in the UK, in Iceland, wherever, it doesn't have to be on US territory. But back to your question, which is why wouldn't they prosecute? Well, we don't know that they wouldn't. Probably not the Trump administration, although the guy hates the media. He has some good reasons to be critical of the media, but certainly it's really that he's angry that they attack him personally. It's not about larger issues of the way corporate media reports things. So that could be dismissed because of his focus on himself. But they could go after him, and a subsequent administration could after this, because the precedent has now been set that a journalist has been indicted under the Espionage Act. I think one reason they wouldn't go after big media is because they are powerful and they can fight back. And they've got the public, a good part of their reading public, and we're talking about millions of people when you're dealing with the New York Times or CNN, who the papers or the TV stations could get their readers on their side and explain, as they're not doing now about Julian, why this is so unfair to indict them on publishing classified information. Now, they should be out front and center defending Julian Assange now because of the possibility of them being in the crosshairs at some point in the future, but they aren't, because they don't think he's a journalist and they don't really think they're going to go after them. And probably they won't because of their power. They also have tremendous, expensive lawyers to fight this. They would bring it to the Supreme Court. They'd get the public behind them. In a way, it would be good if they did indict the New York Times, because then the Times could bring it to the Supreme Court and maybe have that struck down, even this right-wing court. It could possibly have it struck down, and that would free Julian then, because that's the only thing they have him on. All the rest is crap in the indictment, as I've said. But they won't, and I don't think governments will go after big media for the reasons I laid out. However, there is that possibility now. There always was that possibility. As I said, administrations went up right to the edge and then decided not to do it. Trump has, and that was a fundamental difference and a fundamental threat to press freedom.
Well, surely, if they're going to be selective about it, those decisions would be made for political reasons, right? It shows the political nature of this case.
Absolutely. That's why I say it's sedition.
One more thing.
Really. That's why I say it's more sedition than espionage, because sedition is an overtly political matter. They can't even argue national security where they can in the Espionage Act. Because there are people who get documents and give them to adversary or enemy states. This is not what Julian Assange did. This is not a classic espionage case. He didn't take the classified material from Chelsea Manning and give them to an enemy of the United States, unless the government considers the public the enemy of the United States, because that's who Assange gave it to. That's the difference between journalism and espionage, really, is both are trying to get information, secrets, and the spy gives it to their governments and keeps it secret of another. If they steal documents or intelligence from another state, they keep it. Whereas a journalist gets it and gives it to the public. And that's what Assange did. That's another way to define him as a journalist. He's not an intelligence service. He did once say that this WikiLeaks was the intelligence servants of the people, but this is just a rhetorical way of describing what WikiLeaks is all about. And of course, this idiot Pompeo used that. It's even in the indictment, I believe, that they sort of, at the beginning in the preamble, say that he called himself an intelligence agency of the people. I mean, this is so ridiculous to take that out of context. He's not acting like an intelligence agency. WikiLeaks doesn't. Why? Because they publish it. They give it to the public. That's in the word publish. Whereas intelligence services keep it to themselves. So, I really think that it's a great day to talk about this. And I really would hope that mainstream media, they do understand, because if you remember on April 11th of last year, when Assange was dragged out of the embassy, violating asylum laws and whatnot, even Rachel Maddow got on her TV show. And there was nobody on the media who hated Assange more. And she defended him. And she said, as hard as it is for me to do this, basically, because this is about us in the media. It's our bread and butter, publishing classified material. I don't know the last time Rachel Maddow broke a story based on classified material, but in general, she's right that the media does this all the time. And therefore, they couldn't stand for this happening to Assange. The Washington Post and the New York Times had editorials that day saying the same thing. This is going too far, can't do it. But since then, we've heard nothing. They hardly covered the extradition hearing in February. The first day, there was nothing in the Times or the Post. I think the New York Times wrote one article, I think, during that time. So they've lost interest because, as you say, Kathy, they feel pretty comfortable that it won't go against them, but they understand that it could happen to them.
Well, something makes me think that it's all to do with whether they're willing or not to go along with perception management. I was just reviewing today when Bob Parry discovered Walter Raymond, the CIA operative who was in charge of perception management for the United States. I mean, that kind of warning like that, where Lewis, who is more or less the prosecutor in Julian Assange's extradition hearing, has the US lawyers sitting behind him. But yeah, curiously, he is addressing the press, and perhaps that it's not so much the high and the unions or the size of their organization. It really is something to do with whether they will compromise or not, whether they will go along with narratives. As Caitlin Johnson said, who controls the narrative controls the world. So, something tells me that, it's possibly because WikiLeaks won't compromise. And when you reveal all of the raw documents, well, that somewhat short circuits the possibility of perception management. But I'd like to just move on to one more thing that we heard in court, and you and I were there. So this was something that Edward Fitzgerald brought out, or maybe it was Mark Summers. Yeah, I think it was Mark Summers on that day. So he was talking about the first charge. In fact, he talked about 3 points that the prosecution were making. But I'd like to focus on this one, which was about the first charge, the computer hacking. And I think we were all under the impression originally that Chelsea Manning needed to crack a password. Somehow this was in relation to the national security information. But what came out in the hearing was that this password was actually for video games, movies and video clips for the fellow soldiers, because they weren't allowed to install video games on their computers. So in fact, and also the terminal that Manning had access to and had top secret clearance for, there was no login and password. So in fact, that conversation between Manning and, well, we can presume now that Nathaniel Frank was Assange, was something to keep his fellow soldiers happy. It had absolutely nothing to do with this case. So if that and they have evidence to show this. So if that disintegrates, that means that there's only the espionage charges that are left. And in that case, you have to maybe you have to say what sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If you're going to charge Assange, well, then why not charge the Guardian journalists or, well, the New York Times at any point, but post 61 amendment of the Espionage Act, they could charge the Guardian journalists as well, and they are much more culpable because they built the whole search engine and everything. WikiLeaks, as Mark Davis said, didn't have the capacity to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And WikiLeaks didn't even publish first. So, you know, there were many media partners. And I think somehow that warning on the first day by the prosecutor, Mr. Lewis, was somehow warning the press, if you're going to play the game, we won't prosecute you, but as soon as you become defiant of our narratives, our perception management, which has been going on, as Bob Parry pointed out to us, since the 70s, then you're in trouble. Would you agree with any of that?
I always agree with you, Kath. No, actually, no, I don't. But then that's another story. It was interesting. I didn't answer that part before about why he addressed the press. I think that shows that the government is somewhat nervous or quite well aware of the way the press initially reacted, that they could be gone after as well. And so he's reassuring them, which was extraordinary in the middle of this hearing to say that to them, not just to them, but for everybody who would report that. So that they're very aware of this. Part of their strong argument is Assange is not a journalist, so he's a hacker. He's not a journalist. That's what the underlying argument is, and that's why they also teamed this with that Computer Fraud and Abuse Act charge, the first one that is applied to hackers. So they're trying to argue he's a hacker, he's not a journalist, and he sort of hacked in to get these materials. Well, for one reason, I think they won't go after. Another reason, I think they won't go after the big corporate media. And it's interesting, as you point out, that it was the New York Times that published that classified material first, and yet the government went after the second guy who went after, not the first guy, did the exact same thing on a search engine that was built, as you say, by the Guardian. And that's because the corporate media, for a long time now, certainly since the end of the Second World War, but to some extent, maybe exceptions during Vietnam, have been covering up U.S. crimes, covering up U.S. foreign policy, its real motives. Its motives be to extend its geostrategic and economic interests and its political dominance of other states around the world. This doesn't come through in the reporting in the major U.S. media. Instead, we hear they're spreading democracy. They're taking down dictators, et cetera, and they've taken down many democratically elected leaders like Arbenz in Guatemala and Mossadegh in Iran and Allende in Chile, and we could even say Yanukovych in Ukraine. So this is not the way it's portrayed in the major US media. It's portrayed as America doing good for the world, like they really care about people, the people that they bomb and destroy their infrastructure and kill and massacre hundreds of thousands as they did in Iraq. And of course, it was the mainstream media that facilitated that invasion by believing all the trumped up intelligence before about why the US should invade Iraq. So the corporate media is doing its job for the state. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They're laundering intelligence that would not maybe be believed by the public who could be skeptical of the CIA, for example. But if they leak it to the New York Times and the Times publishes it, well, it becomes more credible. That's why I say they're laundering it, because it's not directly to the public. So the Times and the other mainstream media does the job that the state wants them to do. And they're useful. As long as they remain useful, they won't be prosecuted. Assange, on the other hand, did exactly the opposite of what corporate media does, which is to reveal those crimes and corruption and the real motives of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. dominance of other states with the raw materials that prove this. Not a whisper from an intelligence source in a cafe somewhere in the shadows in Washington somewhere or on the phone, but the documents themselves. So they cannot be questioned. We can question New York Times and other reporting when they quote anonymous U.S. intelligence officials, like they recently did on China. China somehow, all of a sudden, clearly the Trump administration wants to go after, blame China to deflect attention from the disastrous way Trump has led on the coronavirus crisis. So China is in the crosshairs. And what did New York Times come out with a story saying that China was behind these Facebook posts that, that put out a lie about the U.S. being locked down nationally. And then they say they only quote anonymous officials in the intelligence services. And then there's a paragraph, it's always been that paragraph in all the Russiagate stories and now Chinagate stories, that the intelligence agents wouldn't give the details of the evidence because it would give up sources and methods. So in other words, take our word for it. And the Times reporters took their word for it. Why? Because it's a big scoop. And and people in government know that journalists live for scoops. They can smell one, it's easy to manipulate them and give them one. So that's why I'm saying the Times and other big media are useful to the intelligence agencies. As long as they remain useful, they can keep on breaking this part of the Espionage Act as long as they want, and they'll never be gone after. And as far as the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act charge, yeah, I was shocked when I was in the courtroom to hear in the public gallery Assange's lawyers laying out that he was actually helping Chelsea break a password to download forbidden music, videos, and games. Now, I don't think that they would say that, Assange's lawyers, if they didn't have the evidence to back that up. So I believe them. I don't think they would put that out in court if they couldn't prove it. So funny enough, that didn't get a lot of traction, that story. People still believe, as I did and most of us did before, who didn't accept the espionage, who didn't accept that indictment, rather the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act indictment, that Chelsea had legal access to all these documents. The indictment says this, that she had legal access, she had top secret clearance, but that Assange was trying to help her sign in under an administrative name only to protect her identity, not to get access to the documents. So that's why from the beginning that indictment was rubbish, because he was doing what journalists do. You mentioned Bob Harry, the founder, of course, the late founding editor of Consortium News. He wrote a piece back in 2010, just when around the time the Obama administration was impaneling that grand jury and thinking of indicting Assange for what Trump ultimately indicted him for. Bob wrote that this is what he did all the time. And of course, Bob Perry, for people who don't know, was one of the best investigative journalists of his generation. He broke some of the biggest Iran-Contra stories about cocaine, Nicaragua transfers, and he quit AP when they spiked his stories because they were protecting the state. Very much like that. They were protecting the state, US state interests. So Bob quit AP, and then he quit Newsweek because they were also spiking his stories. And he started in 1995 Consortium News, 25 years. We're celebrating our anniversary. Bob did what Julian Assange did later. He published classified information that undermined the interests of the US government and the US state. And that's why he felt strong connection, I believe, with Julian Assange and wrote this piece in 2010 in which he said he not only encouraged his source to give more, the crying eyes quote, that they seem to criminalize because Assange asked Chelsea for more. Not only did Bob ask him to give him more, he said that he asked him to break the law in order to do that. The law being the taking of the classified documents in order to prevent a larger crime from being committed. So if an analyst, an intelligence analyst, takes a classified document, gives it to the press, the release of that information curtails a war or prevents a war, that is a crime worth committing, and that's what we whistleblowers do. And Julian was doing that with Chelsea. So I see Commander X with your hand up. So I'll just stop filibustering right now.
Hi. Yeah, I want to say a couple of things. I'm a hacker, okay, and damn fucking proud of it. And also, I'm an author, and I'll be dropping my third book that'll be in print in July. You can be many things. You can be a fireman and you can be a baker at the same time. And you can be all of those things, and all of those things are legitimate. If I'm a hacker, my consequences and my responsibility, my social responsibility for those actions are separate from my rights to publish as an author. I can't be penalized, or my books can't be censored because they describe me hacking. So to me, that whole thing is really it's a non-existent point. It's a moot point because, and with regard to the CFAA, I am in Mexico right now with political asylum because of a CFAA charge. So let me tell you guys about what the CFAA is really all about. Okay, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act has been used in ways they have sent researchers to prison for months on charges based on the CFAA. And all these researchers did was aggregate public information, publicly available information, and deliver it to the press. And they have gone to jail for it. The CFAA is the espionage law of hackers. And whether anybody wants to acknowledge it or not, maybe everybody thinks or paints hacking or hackers as some big black thing. We are persecuted too. I am here in Mexico to stand for the fucking hackers because we are persecuted too. Okay. And like Barrett Brown said in the We Are Legion movie, you know, there are some things that you people, the world, all of you out there listening would never, ever know if it weren't for the hackers, because it's stuff that will never be found out by a congressional hearing. It will never be found out by an investigative journalist. It will never be dug up unless one of us goes in there and takes the information and gives it to you. So I want to make crystal clear that whether or not Julian is a hacker, and I'm sorry, but he is, okay? I can vouch for the fact because that's how I met him, okay? And that is a moot point to the fact that he's a publisher and a journalist as well. And the CFAA, you can share your Netflix password with another person. And under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, you can be charged with a felony that can earn you 2 years in prison for sharing a Netflix password if they were to choose to prosecute you under the CFAA. The CFAA is nothing more than a sword that the prosecutors in the United States of America use against information activists, which covers all of us, hackers, publishers, sources, all of it. The whole front of information activism is now under attack and has been for 10 years since we first came to Wikileaks' defense, since the hackers were the first people in the world when no one else in the world would stand up for Julian in 2010. The hackers took down PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, one after another. We were costing MasterCard $1 million a minute 3 days before Christmas because of Julian Assange. Okay, so we've done our part and we've stood the line, and we paid an awful price. It's one of the reasons I was run to Mexico, because I was one of the people in charge of that shit. I was one of the people leading that shit, and they knew it. And that's the reason I'm here, not the CFAA law that they used to try to put me in jail. And that's what the CFAA's purpose is. Its only purpose is to get you to stop what you're doing. And so if you're doing research that, for instance, exposes AT&T for having just the most incredibly shoddy material on their newest iPad that they released back in 2008, check me on my details, but you know, and you release that to the press and they charge you, you go to prison for 2 years. That's what the CFAA is about. They wanted that man, that researcher, to stop releasing that information because AT&T was embarrassed. They had this premier product that the whole world wanted. Obama got one, his daughter got one, and all their data got dumped because of this man's research that he released to the press. And it was AT&T's fault. Dead wood AT&T's fault. And yet he was prosecuted. So when they bring the CFAA out, which I found it very interesting and a little bit kind of an honor, that it was the first charge Julian was charged with, was the CFAA. That was the first charge they dropped on him. And I think that's, you know, it's telling, and it shows that this is, again, they're wielding this sword called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And this law that they're persecuting Julian with, besides the espionage law, is very important. It has killed people. It has killed friends of ours, friends of mine and Julian's. Aaron Schwartz hung himself, one of the most brilliant fucking men ever to live in our lifetime. literally on the fucking planet. He invented Reddit at the age of 15, okay, and founded it. Good God Almighty, he invented RSS at the age of 13, the feeds that we use. And he hung himself in a fucking room alone in New York because of the CFAA and the persecution, how they will go after your family. They went after mine. They'll go after your friends. These motherfuckers are the Gestapo. That's what they are. And the CFAA is just one of many tools that they can whip open their book and use these blue laws or these archaic laws. The CFAA is very archaic. It was written in the 80s. And they can use these laws. They keep them on the books on purpose, even though they know they're deprecated laws. And that way they can use them as a weapon against whatever political, in this case, it's information activists. The CFAA is very useful. But we have a running joke amongst hackers, man. Basically, if you buy a computer and turn it on, you just broke the CFAA. It could come with an indictment under the lid. They could just give you one with the computer and say, you've now been indicted. Just send this in when you turn the fucking thing on. That's how easy it is to break the CFAA, break that law. So that is, again, it's indicative of where Julian stands. There is nothing wrong with being in favor of free access to information and saying that there is a cause behind WikiLeaks. There is a political movement behind WikiLeaks, and the hackers are front and center. Part of it, they're a good part of it, a part that can be people. There are heroes. Jeremy Hammond, half the leaks on WikiLeaks belong to a friend of mine named Jeremy Hammond, who's doing 10 years for getting those secrets and putting them 10 years. He just got out of the grand jury thing and he's still finishing his sentence. We never hear him talked about. Why? Because he's a street anarchist with dreadlocks? Because he used to go around breaking Starbucks windows before he started breaking servers? Look, man, judge not lest ye be the one who has to fucking resist someday. That's all I've got to say. Don't judge the parts of the movement. And that may seem a little dark or whatever. Hacking is, the hackers I know are heroes, straight up. And the world has been so dramatically changed because of, and they knew, all of us are very smart men. We knew going into this that we were going to face these charges, that we were going to face this hideous persecution. 10 years, they spent millions of dollars. They chased me across 3 countries because of my defense of WikiLeaks.
My point was that
and I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, that's fine. My point was that Assange was not charged in that first indictment for hacking. He was trying to help Chelsea sign in under a different name to protect her identity. That's what the indictment says, and the investigators are angry because that would make it harder for them to find out who had done this. Not hacking. In fact, the word hacking doesn't appear anywhere in that indictment, even though it did on the Justice Department release. Because that's
I thought I heard you say it. I thought I heard you say it earlier, but I think really the point where you hit on is it's a smear attempt. And this is why I'm being so vehement about this, because it's an attempt to, first of all, it's an assumption, a social assumption that hackers are the bad guys, and we're fucking not. Okay. And then going with that social assumption, again, what Kathy was saying, who writes the narrative, right? So the narrative is that we're the bad guys, we're the shitheads, right? So the way to smear shit on him is to stick a CFAA charge. I don't actually think they give a shit about that charge, and that'll be the first one they negotiate off the table when they start, if they ever have to start talking about legal plea bargaining or anything like that. It'll be the first one to go. It's a shit charge. It's there for one reason only, because they can, number one, and number two, because it smears him as a hacker. Well, guess what? He's a hacker. So you wasted your time. You didn't need the CFAA charge.
Right.
I could have told you that myself.
But he may, in regardless of his past, he was not charged with hacking in this case. This was Chelsea Manning who freely gave the material to him. That's the point I was making.
Well, it's the hacking law. I mean, the researcher that did that research on AT&T and gave it to Vice magazine, he didn't do any hacking either. None at all. There was literally zero penetration. He did it all in a browser with publicly available addresses and aggregated that information. And it was just shitty security on AT&T's part to put that all on a public web server And it was very, very embarrassing. But he did months and months in prison before that charge was finally overturned on a technicality, not even on the merits of the case. And the judge scratched his head. He's like, I can't believe that this made it into my appeals court. I wish I could rule on the rest of it. He even said, I wish I could rule on the rest of how ridiculous this case is, the CFAA case. But I just wanted to make clear that it's a hacking charge and it's meant to smear him, not meant to. I don't believe that they have any worry or concern about source. That's not why that charge was in there. That charge was put in there for one reason only, because they knew they could, and because they knew that it's a smear on Julian to call him a hacker. And rather than dodge around that and try to dance circles around that, I would rather just say straight up, okay, he's a fucking hacker. You know what? And we're the good guys, so tough shit. And that's a shitty fucking law. And it's the reason I'm here in Mexico. And guess what? The Mexican government agreed with me. The Mexican government took a very careful look at the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, because that's why I'm here. And they 100% agreed with me that this law is almost universally used for political reasons. So therefore, just being charged with it, they considered to be ipso facto evidence that I needed asylum. Okay. And number two, that there's no possible way you could beat the charge. It is literally physically, it's just impossible to beat a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act charge. Nobody has ever beaten one. That's why Aaron hung himself. Okay. And so if they push it to the limit, you can't beat it. And that's why Jeremy's in there. Jeremy's also under Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So, and he did do network penetration. So it's just this vast thing. Like I said, you can trade a network's password and you'll be a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act victim or, prosecuted. So I don't know. I just think that honesty beats everything, and let's just push forward. Julian's rights stand no matter what he did. It wouldn't matter what he had done in his past, whether he was a drunkard, whether he got parking tickets, whether he smoked pot in the 60s. It wouldn't have fucking mattered. None of that shit fucking matters. What matters is that he's a publisher and a journalist facing the most obvious and dire attack by empire in human history. Never have we seen a contest like this where we see whole Western nations, a whole Western empire arrayed against a single fucking man. And as somebody who has fought the empire single-handedly myself, I can tell you that that's it's incredibly courageous, first of all, and it takes almost a death wish, really, to push through to the end, to the very, very end, to not ever give up. And this is what we need to focus on. This is what's going to free Julian, is focusing on the fact that there's this single man against this vast fucking empire. We can't let a single individual be a sacrifice to liberty. We just can't. We can't do that. Individual life has to mean something. It has to mean something. Sovereignty and nations and laws and fucking ink stains on old books that they call religion, all of that shit has to give way to the individual human. It has to, or else I will not relent. I will resist this world to my dying breath if a single individual can't get all his rights just to convenience the state. It's just unacceptable. And that to me is the focus of this argument. The legal stuff is all icing on the cake. I think the espionage charge is the beef of it. That's the thing to focus on. And I think we should be crystal clear that the CFAA charge is bogus, that there are a lot of victims of this charge that people should resonate with when they consider Julian's CFAA beef. You should also resonate with a lot of people who have been victims of this particular law, and they stand in solidarity with Julian. And we should put it aside because it's a smear designed to tell us something we already know. So there, that's my piece anyway. I'll let you guys, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take over. I give it back to you guys. I love you guys. Thanks, Mr. Yeah, what's his name? I don't see his name. Joe Laurier.
Joe Laurier. That's Joe Laurier there. Yeah.
I'm looking at
Yeah.
tiny.
Thank you, Mr. X. Mr. X.
No, it's no problem. Thank you, Joe, for the comments and everything. I just wanted to give a hacker's perspective because you were
that was brilliant.
throwing the hacker thing and the CFAA thing around a lot there, and I just wanted to say that there's actually one on the show, so maybe I'll say my piece.
Very good.
Yeah, well, we haven't forgotten. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can't hear you anymore, Commander.
I'm sorry,
X,
I muted up.
That's all right.
I'm a streamer, so I try to.
That's okay.
I'm good with the mute and unmute button, but maybe I overdo it sometimes.
Yeah, that's all right. No, I was just going to say we certainly haven't forgotten Operation Payback and all of the other amazing discoveries, even about the HB Gary project.
He's in my book. And you know what? He has a very particular hatred for me. That's very funny.
I'm sure he does.
He considers me like his arch nemesis. I'm like, he's like Joker and I'm Batman, or the other way around in his mind, I guess. But he's a funny dude, man. He's what a character. No, the point is, I think we should set it aside because I realize too, I'm a propagandist. I work with publicity all the time and how to get messages across and everything. And I get that this is not something we should dwell on necessarily. I mean, it's not, I don't want to drape Operation Payback across my back and go, hey, look, everybody, we hacked MasterCard and Visa for Julian. I mean, that's not going to gain us a lot either, and that's not where I'm at with it. I'm not going to hang my head in shame, and I'm not going to have Julian by proxy hang his head in shame.
No, but I think
he's a whole man, and what makes him a genius is the fact that he is a hacker, among the many things that he is.
Yeah, but you have to put aside this great work, I think, that many individuals and groups did. From the publishing activities, I think you've already said this, of WikiLeaks.
Exactly. They're two different things.
Absolutely. And in this particular case, in the case of the Manning matter, the Manning committed what is called the core crime. And then Assange is associated by a charge of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. So that's whether he was involved in helping Manning get the classified information. So the whole hacking thing does not come in to this at all.
It's a smear. It's a smear. They're using the
absolutely,
CFAA,
absolutely.
Evil law
yes.
That has ruined other people's lives. I just wanted to make that point.
Well, I'd also
to smear him as a hacker.
I also have to remind you as well of what Julian Assange said about the press in Australia. She was, for years, for many, many years, she was constantly having to call the press and ask for modifications, because there was a certain amount of libel going on. I remember at one point in time, I remember there were 13 libel cases that WikiLeaks was engaged in at the same time, which is why they needed funding. But Christine was always having to call the Australian press because they were, in the last interview I did with her, they were constantly calling him a hacker. In order to create that, this is all part of the perception management war. And you have hackers who steal people's credit card numbers. You have ethical hackers like yourself. The fact that you can get in, past.
I mean, to me, a criminal.
Absolutely. But even
Jeremy Hammond, I'd like to flip that analogy on its head. Jeremy Hammond could have gone down to Stratford. And he could have broken the lock on the fence, broke a window, climbed inside, and taken all of their servers, and he would have served 2 years in prison. But because he took the data over the network, he's doing 10. So